Hi, I'm Griffin. Welcome to my channel. Here I discuss a wide array of different topics, such as counseling, psychology, philosophy, and of course, history. So all of these are my favorite topics, and I hope you join me for those. Keep in mind, this is not counseling, nor is this a counseling relationship. Instead, these videos are a forum for discussion and a place for some deeper thought. In today's video, we are going to be discussing the psychological impact of social isolation. Clearly, humans are social by nature. If we were not, we could not have developed the complex civilizations that we have. Humans are new to the civilized world. Now, recorded history is only about 5,000 years, and keywords there's the recorded. Modern man entered Eurasia sometime between 250 and 180,000 years ago, and the Upper Stone Age only began around 9000 BC. While some psychologists would look to that time, or even prior to that time, to understand the formation of the social abilities of man, I'm more interested in looking at that roughly 200 generations of human interaction that shows that we are clearly dependent upon our ability to form complex social bonds. Now, clearly, the first complex social bond is that of the tribe. But what is a tribe? A tribe is a gathering of usually family units, chosen or forced upon us, where we have grown up in a family and extended family unit. Now, sometimes we break away and we form new tribes. But tribes are a shared social group. They're usually small in nature, and prior to the advent of the agricultural revolution, nomadic. But these are some signs of what we refer to as civilization. That is, a culture, a shared language, the ability to cooperate, to trade, and to even build. The use of tools, for example, is a sign of the beginnings of civilization. But civilization as we know it most often refers to the great city builders, like Egypt and the Greeks and the Romans, civilizations that built massive monuments and roads and extensive trade networks. Clearly, those depend upon a social contract to be able to form. If it wasn't for that, cities are not able to produce enough food to be able to sustain themselves. Hence, cities only developed after the agricultural revolution and the ability to domesticate both animals and crops. It's interesting then that after the advent of cities, we begin to develop a complex social relationship that was either driven by religion or was assisted by the religion of those that occupied that city. Eventually, this became organized more around the polis, such as the Greek city-states of Athens or Sparta, where instead of identifying by family, they identified by the city. And that's an important distinction because now it's showing that tribes are no longer just family units, but rather city units or geographical units. And eventually they extend out. In the late 18th, 19th, and 20th century, we begin to see nationalism as a form of tribalism, where people's identifying by the nation that they belong to. And now, tribes have shifted even further. No longer is a tribe located just geographically, nor are you excluded from other tribes just simply because you belong to one. Technology, again either driving or assisting, has enabled us to develop tribal connections through online communities. Thus, it's possible to maintain membership in multiple different tribes in multiple different places. So what happens when we're disconnected from our tribe? A 2015 meta-analysis published in Perspectives of Psychology found that regardless of using subjective or objective measures, studies found an increased likelihood in mortality. Now it's interesting there because first we need to discuss two separate things for that. One, what is a meta-analysis, and what does it mean by subjective and objective? See, a meta-analysis is a study of studies. And that is, the researchers, using their criteria, looked to see if there was a correlation in outcomes behind multiple different studies. So in this case, they were looking at a wide number, I believe it was 70 some other studies, to see if there was a correlation in outcomes. And what they found was, while some studies measure an objective, that is, the researcher said this and that defines loneliness, this and that describes isolation, and this is what living alone means. So they were objective, they were measurable. We can ascertain those through empirical data. Was the same outcome as studies that used a subjective measure. That is, the participants would rate whether they were lonely based off of the self-report, or if they were isolated, or if they lived alone. And that means that they weren't necessarily objectively those things. And so the most interesting aspect of all of this is the study found that there was a 26% increase in mortality. That is, individuals were more likely to die by about 26% if they reported loneliness, 29% if they reported isolation, and 32% increased mortality if they were living alone. Again, that's regardless of whether it was subjective or objective outcomes. And this was over a 7-year course, regardless of age, gender, socioeconomic status, or pre-existing conditions. Now, this combines with a 2011 publication from the New York Academy of the Sciences. Now, here they found that social isolation resulted in an increased activation of the fear network. What that means is the brain reacted more to danger or threats of danger than the brain did if it was socially connected. So when we place an individual alone, that trauma network activates even more. That fight or flight is more acutely activated. Now, this has several ramifications. It leads to the possibility of trauma, such as PTSD, decreases in immune system because of increased stressors, disrupted sleep, or further aggression. It also had an interesting outcome in which individuals had increased inflammation. That is, an increase of swelling. Now, that's probably connected to that reduction in the body's immune system and its ability to respond to threats. Now, all of those combine into a possible reason for the increase in mortality rates among those that are living alone, socially isolated, or lonely. Now, this falls in line with another more recent interesting study, which was a comprehensive review of animal models published in Biomedicine and Pharmacotherapy in 2018. And what the study found was if you socially isolate animals at an early age, that is, early in their development cycle, they end up with maladapted brains. That is, their brains would actually develop slower than their peers. And this resulted in a number of different disruptions in their neurotransmitters. Now, these neurotransmitters turned out to be the same ones that we link to multiple different mental disorders, such as schizophrenia, memory loss, disrupted sleep, depression, and anxiety. Now, this reinforces some of what we already know. The DSM-V, that is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, 5, used by the American Psychology Association to diagnose mental disorders, is already well aware of the link of social isolation in mental disorders. It's one of the reasons why in the American system, you're more likely to see fewer mental asylums or mental hospitals and more of what's called a community-based clinic. That is, group homes and cluster apartments where the severely mentally ill are able to live as a part of the community, thus removing that social isolation. Now, there is a great debate, one that this video doesn't have time to cover, between whether or not mental disorders precede that social isolation, or if the social isolation is a part of the mental disorder. Either which way, an impediment in the ability to form social bonds or participate in the social contract is a part of a measurement for a possible diagnosis. And that becomes a very interesting and tedious point, because now we're very aware that failing to be able to act in a social manner, whether that's through self-report, I feel lonely, or objectively, as in nobody likes you or will be around you, the result becomes the same. Increased stress, increased risk for depression, anxiety, memory loss, disrupted sleep. And so what that means is now we're seeing a mass area of people who are socially isolated. Now, what does that mean in the modern day, though? Well, now we're looking at tribes that exist both in person, geographically, and virtually. And so it's possible to still maintain social contact via our virtual networks. But are those networks helpful? That's a long discussion, and it's not one that I think anybody can come to easy answers to. We are very much aware that sometimes our social connections are not healthy, they're not good, and sometimes even a negative relationship is better than no relationship. And that becomes tricky. And if you're in one of those positions, I highly encourage you to reach out to a counselor, not here, and utilize them to navigate through that complexity. But what we're really asking is, how do we contribute to and benefit from that social contract? Is this beneficial? Is it helpful? Can I contribute to it? These are questions that I have to ask myself when I am assessing whether or not the tribe that I belong to is useful and helpful. If you've liked this content, leave a like, maybe even a subscribe. I do look forward to hearing your thoughts on this. I highly recommend you check out the resources I post. You can judge for yourself whether or not you find them informative, and I look forward to seeing you in future videos.